By 1941, the Soviet Union was absorbing the full weight of the German invasion. To keep the Eastern Front from collapsing, the Allies had to find a way to move heavy munitions and equipment into Russian hands. This map illustrates the three supply arteries to feed the Soviet war machine. Air from Alaska or land through Iran couldn't handle the required tonnage. That left the sea route through the North Atlantic, directly through the primary hunting grounds of the German Navy. The scale of the cargo was staggering. Success meant delivering entire lines of heavy steel tanks, fighter aircraft, and thousands of transport trucks across miles of open ocean. Moving this much material required the convoy system. Dozens of merchant vessels were packed into a tight grid, guarded by a perimeter of naval escorts. The mechanics were grueling. Every ship in the fleet was required to travel at the speed of the absolute slowest vessel. This slow, geometric formation was designed as a shield. By clustering the merchant ships together, the escorts could provide an overlapping defensive perimeter, using depth charges and massed fire to hunt the hidden threats beneath the waves. Benjamin Franklin Weinmeister served in the Royal Canadian Naval Volunteer Reserve. As a signalman, he lived and worked inside the center of that slow-moving grid. In a convoy, radio silence was absolute. Keying a single microphone meant German direction-finding equipment could instantly triangulate the fleet's location and vector in U-boats. To keep the fleet silent, Weinmeister had to communicate visually. He stood on exposed, freezing decks, using semaphore flags and directional Aldis lamps to transmit tactical orders. His job was to keep the grid from breaking. One missed signal could cause a collision, leaving the fleet vulnerable. His service record reflects the war's global reach. He rushed supplies to Egypt via the Suez Canal, survived depth charges in the Bay of Biscay, and in the Red Sea a torpedo passed directly astern, a terrifying near miss. For sailors like Weinmeister, warfare was characterized by an agonizing endurance of vulnerability. They spent years crossing the globe at a walking pace, waiting day after day for a threat they often couldn't see. As the Allies struggled to keep the supply lines open, a new threat emerged in the fjords of northern Norway, the German battleship Tirpitz. The Tirpitz was a leviathan, armed with 8 15-inch guns that could fire 1,700-pound shells at a range of 20 miles. She possessed the raw power to sink any single Allied warship in a direct engagement. The Germans employed the Tirpitz as a fleet in being. She rarely left the fjords, but her existence forced the British to keep heavy battleships stationed nearby, pinning down Allied resources and preventing them from moving freely. Winston Churchill became increasingly fixated on the vessel, labeling the Tirpitz the most important naval vessel in the situation today. If the Tirpitz ever reached a convoy of slow merchant ships, it would be a systematic slaughter. For the Admiralty, every decision on the Arctic route was now made under the shadow of what this ship might do. In June 1942, convoy PQ-17 set sail from Iceland. It was the largest and most valuable supply run attempted to date, carrying 300 aircraft and 600 tanks. One officer watched them leave and described the merchantmen waddling out to sea like so many dirty ducks. The environment itself acted as a trap. Slow-melting pack ice funneled the convoy away from the safety of the open ocean, forcing the ships to sail dangerously close to the German-occupied coast of Norway. In the summer, the Arctic is bathed in the perpetual daylight of the midnight sun. The convoy lost the critical camouflage of darkness, leaving them exposed to reconnaissance planes 24 hours a day. Then the Admiralty received panicked, faulty intelligence. They believed the Tirpitz had slipped its torpedo nuts and was closing in on PQ-17. Naval doctrine for a battleship attack was clear: scatter. Fleeing in all directions forces a raider to hunt them one by one, sacrificing few to save many. Believing Tirpitz was imminent, the Admiralty withdrew the armed escorts, leaving the slow merchantmen completely alone. This decision was a catastrophic miscalculation. By optimizing their defense for a battleship that hadn't actually moved, the Admiralty completely exposed the scattered fleet to the U-boats and bombers that were already there. Without their escorts to keep the U-boats submerged and the bombers at a distance, the isolated merchant ships were easily picked off in the perpetual Arctic daylight. The final losses were staggering. Out of the 33 merchant ships that reached the scatter point, 24 were sent to the bottom. Thousands of trucks and hundreds of tanks meant for the front lines simply vanished. The Tirpitz never engaged the convoy and never fired its guns. Yet it had achieved the greatest German victory over an Allied convoy in the entire war. The Admiralty's fear of the Tirpitz had achieved more than the battleship itself ever could. By optimizing for a threat that wasn't there, they had essentially dismantled their own fleet's defenses. Benjamin Weinmeister survived his own Arctic runs through the ice of the White Sea, but he was acutely aware of how much his survival depended on the decisions made by men hundreds of miles away. While anchored in Russian ports like Archangel, he listened to BBC news broadcasts every day. He knew that if the German army took Moscow, his Russian hosts might flee for a German-held port, and he would instantly become a prisoner of war. While leaders in London and Moscow negotiated the movement of millions of tons of cargo, the actual survival of those supplies rested on the endurance of sailors standing on frozen steel decks. They were fighting the ocean, the cold, and the limits of their own nervous systems. Weinmeister eventually summarized years of navigating submarine alerts, hurricanes, and near-miss torpedoes in a single, understated diary entry. Extremely hard on the nerves. In the darkest theaters of war, the deadliest weapon isn't always a shell or a torpedo. Sometimes it is the simple, agonizing fear of what might be lurking just over the horizon.